And there, the trend is still extremely positive. For what it's worth, I think we'll see more inflows in the second half of the year than we saw in the first half of the year. So I think there is still significant market to unlock in the Bitcoin ETFs, and all the trends and customer data I'm seeing suggest that we're on that upward slope.
This content is brought to you by VeChain, which is a leading enterprise-grade Layer 1 public blockchain spearheading a digital revolution from a sustainable, highly scalable smart contract platform. The VeChain blockchain has many unique features, which makes it an ideal choice for Web3 applications. VeChain is working with many great enterprises such as PwC, Givenchy, BMW, and Walmart China. Most recently, they partnered with the Boston Consulting Group to build a revolutionary decentralized application ecosystem. I'm a big believer in this project. I have been since 2018. I've been a VET token holder for years. And this blockchain is highly scalable, great with security and speed, and it has low energy consumption. If you'd like to learn more about VeChain, please visit vchain.org. Link will be in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and with me today is Matt Hougan, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Bitwise Asset Management. Matt, great to have you back on.
Tony, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Matt, it feels like every month we need to touch base because the ETF news keeps ramping up. And I got to start with the Ethereum spot ETF, Matt. What can you tell us? You and the folks at Bitwise are in the running, and we're hearing news of the SEC's engaging with the issuers. What can you tell us?
Yeah, obviously, the legal rule, I can only speak about what's available in the record and not about our specific filing. But I can tell you that I went to bed on Friday night not thinking there were going to be Ethereum ETFs in the near term. And by the end of the day, Monday, I think we all were thinking. When I looked at the poly market odds, it was funny. I was writing about the pending disapproval on Friday night. And Polymarket had us at 10% odds of approval, and now those odds are 88% and rising, I think. So it's just a remarkable turnaround. What happened specifically was on Monday, the SEC reached out to multiple exchanges and therefore to issuers to update their 19B4, which is one of the two documents the SEC has to approve before an ETF can list. And we know that the SEC has to say yes or no by Thursday.
Mm.
And they probably, most people assume, wouldn't ask you to update your filing if they then were going to reject it. That would be cruel. That doesn't guarantee that it'll be approved, but it looks like we're moving in a very positive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Matt, do you think that look, given this quick turnaround time and the processing time it takes with the folks at the SEC, that they're able to approve, let's say, the 19-4s or 19B-4s, excuse me, and then move on to the S1s a week from now or 2 weeks from now?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So for the listeners, as I mentioned, there are these two documents, the 19B4 and the S1. The 19B4 is the approval to list, and that's focused on things like market manipulation and those sorts of things. People might remember that that was the thing that was hard to get for the Bitcoin ETF, that we struggled to get for 10 plus years, was approval of the 19B4s. The S1, or the prospectus, is the document that discloses all of the risks. And usually that's just a back and forth process. Use these words, not those words. What about referencing this? What about this risk? I suspect that that could take, historically, that takes anywhere from a few weeks to a few months to work through the system. I bet we'll move fast here, but I don't know exactly when it will happen.
Now, one of the things that were mentioned, and you can help validate some of this, that the SEC seems to be striking out staking. They don't want any staking a part of this. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, we've seen multiple issuers update their S1s and their 19B4s to remove staking. So I do think it's fair to assume that the SEC doesn't want to see that in these first iterations of ETFs. That doesn't mean staking is off the table for all time for Ethereum ETFs. It just means that the minimum viable product is this simplified version that doesn't include staking. I think the market is trying to read a lot into it. And it could be the case that the SEC is concerned, for instance, that staking implicates security laws. But it could equally be the case that they just want the simplest version first, right? If you think about the Bitcoin ETFs, we did cash creates and not in-kind creates. That was a simpler version first, an MVP. And it's, I would say, impossible to say what the SEC's motive is here between those two options. But the TLDR is, yeah, it looks like these ETFs, if they are approved, will not have staking.
Matt, let's say they are able to get this done by tomorrow. It would be pretty exciting. ETH is moving on the charts a bit. What do you anticipate is going to happen? And this market's going to go crazy?
Yeah, I think the market is now expecting to get this approval tomorrow. So I don't know that there'll be immediate reaction, but I do think over the long term, this is obviously a significant positive catalyst for ETH. The demand for Ethereum-based ETFs, in my expectation, will be lower than the demand for Bitcoin ETFs because it's a smaller market, it's a slightly more complicated story. But at the same time, the size of the market is smaller and the issuance is smaller, right? There's only about $10 million of ETH produced each day. That's, less than a third of what's produced in Bitcoin. So I think it has a very strong positive long-term effect. I would not expect, sort of the record numbers we saw on Bitcoin. I would scale that down to the size of this market and maybe a little bit less, but it's still a very big deal. It's a very big deal long-term for the asset. It's a very big deal for regulatory reasons if it happens. And I think investors should be optimistic about where crypto is going based on these and other developments.
Mm. Now, Matt, based on what you were saying earlier, that Friday you went to bed and so forth, and even Monday, folks were not optimistic about these ETFs getting approved by the SEC because there's been a lot of hurdles, there's a lot of ambiguity as it relates to the SEC and what Gensler is thinking. But then you have this 180. And I don't know if it has to do with the change in the political tide. Crypto has become so political. Donald Trump putting his stake in the ground saying, I'm the pro crypto candidate. And then you have the industry rallying behind many Democrats who joined with Republicans to repeal SOB 121. And the FIT bill vote today is scheduled for today. Do you think politics is playing a part in this for the SEC's making that 180?
Yeah, I have a hard time knowing for sure. It's hard to look at the late stage of this pivot
Mm.
and see, or maybe I'll reframe that. It's easy to look at the late stage of this pivot and see politics playing a role. The alternative is the SEC was weighing it up to this point and just made a late stage determination. But I will say, and I wrote about this in my CIO memo, the potential for a spot ETH ETF is really exciting, but I actually think it's not the most important thing going on in Washington right now. I think it's what you referred to. It's this broader political shift. I mean, we had both houses of Congress with bipartisan support vote through the first pro-crypto piece of legislation in our industry's history,
Mm.
right? It's never happened. It happened on SAB 121. We see the FIT bill, and we think 9 Democrats have said they're going to cross the aisle and vote for it. Will it clear or will it not? I don't know. But that is a game changer. And we're seeing it more broadly in how the candidates are talking about crypto. It's now become important for both sides of the aisle to position themselves at least neutral, if not very pro crypto. And that's just a complete game changer in terms of where this industry goes over the next 18 months, 36 months, and multiple years.
Yeah, it's exciting. And boy, I got in 2016 and I'm still in shock. I have to pinch myself sometimes, like, wow. I mean, it's amazing what is happening. And crypto is that it becoming ubiquitous and it's appearing everywhere now. Politics, TradFi, and so forth. It's amazing what's taking place.
It's really incredible. And we're 18 months removed from FTX.
Wow.
Think of how this industry has changed over those last 18 months. We've seen BlackRock enter the space. We've seen spot Bitcoin ETFs approved and set records. We've seen firms, major Wall Street firms lobbying for stable coins and custody and being able to enter that market. Now we see it being discussed at the presidential level. Crypto is going mainstream, and that is a huge change. I think people underestimate how big of a change that is. That's a 10 factor change in terms of where this industry is going. And it's really remarkable to see and to live through it in real time.
Hmm. Now, Matt, this morning we got news that London approved their Bitcoin ETPs, following Hong Kong and, of course, the United States. What are your thoughts on that launch? And are you expecting significant inflows? I don't know much about, the UK and their markets, and Hong Kong wasn't that much, but it was significant for their market. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was hugely successful for the Hong Kong market. I mean, it's worth noting Hong Kong is, a little tiny island with a
Mhm.
relatively small asset management market and a much smaller ETF market. So on a scale basis, it was at least as successful as the US launch. I think whatever jurisdiction you're in, people want exposure to crypto and they love ETFs. So when you put it together, that's a success. The European market is unusual, and these new ETPs in London are unusual in that they're specifically and only targeting professional investors. I
Mm,
suspect it's a slow burn from an asset gathering perspective,
sure.
but I do think it speaks to this broader narrative, which is whether you're in the US or Europe or the Middle East or Asia, crypto is going from something that was outside the mainstream that had sort of two hands tied behind its back to something that is increasingly mainstream. And, we already have very successful crypto ETFs in Europe. These will just be, one more fuel on that fire. So I don't think they're specifically important, but I think that they speak to this broader trend, which is a game changer for crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to talk about the US Bitcoin ETFs, because after the massive run up that we saw, I think it was in March, and then Bitcoin pullback, healthy pullback and correction, we saw some outflows out of the ETFs. And I wonder if you can take us behind the curtains and tell us about, is that a normal thing, the rebalancing of the portfolio, because now it's starting to inverse where we're seeing inflows on the rise.
Yeah, this is completely normal. Even the most successful ETFs in the world, I mean, those are the Bitcoin ETFs, but outside of Bitcoin, in the equity market, in the bond market, in the commodity market, ETFs just natively have inflows and outflows as the market adjusts to micro changes in sentiment, right? If people are slightly less excited to buy Bitcoin today versus yesterday, then we're going to see marginal outflows. Even if you look at like historic ETF successes, the gold ETFs, they had 7 straight years of inflows, and it rose the level of inflows every year for 7 years, and drove that ETF to $100 billion in assets. It was a historic high. But within those years, there were months, there were weeks, there were quarters where there were outflows. That's just the natural name of the game in ETF land. You really have to step back and look at these things over months or quarters or years to see the trend. And there, the trend is still extremely positive. For what it's worth, I think we'll see more inflows in the second half of the year than we saw in the first half of the year. So
Wow.
I think there is still significant market to unlock in the Bitcoin ETFs, and all the trends and customer data I'm seeing suggests that we're on that upward slope.
Yeah, and congrats to Bitwise's incredible inflows and performance. I saw Hunter Horty post on Twitter, I believe, just yesterday or the day before, 24 million came in one day. It's amazing what's taking place.
Yeah, yeah, we have weeks with hundreds of millions of dollars of inflows. The fund is, north of $2.5 billion, I believe, last time I checked, which is just really remarkable. And we're proud to be a crypto specialist asset manager, competing against the big boys, BlackRock and Fidelity, and holding our own. We're excited that our ETF, donates 10% of its gross profits to Bitcoin core developers. So those flows that are coming in are really supporting the Bitcoin ecosystem, which I think is nice, and important. And again, I'm very optimistic for what we'll see in the rest of the year.
Hmm. Final question here before I let you go. Um, I know all of the issuers are out talking to RIAs and wealth managers and so forth. How have those conversations been going on your end? Have folks been more open than they were in the past? I don't know if you can share any stats or any names, but I'll let you tell us as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually had these 13F filings for the Bitcoin ETFs where professional investors who manage over $100 million in assets have to disclose if they own them. And we learned a huge amount. There were more than 900 professional firms that bought these Bitcoin ETFs in their first 2 months on the market. They own more than $10 billion of exposure. And I'll tell you a secret from Bitwise's history, which is we've been serving this market for 7 years. And the way our sales team thinks about winning in this market is it's more important to have a customer win than the size of the assets that come in. So we'd rather have 50 $1 million wins than one $50 million win by a factor of like 1,000. We're really focused on those wins because what we found is once people allocate a little bit, they tend to allocate more. They tend to allocate for more clients. They tend to build their position over time. A huge percentage of people who come in the door increase their exposure. The reason that's important is if you look at these holdings, I said close to 1,000 professional firms. These firms control well north of $1 trillion of assets. They are going to build from their initial allocations, which tend to be, millions, a few in the 10 million zone, many in the hundreds of thousands of dollars zones. Those are going to increment up to where they're 1, 2, 3% of those portfolios. So I think there's no way that I can see to look at the data we have in terms of who's buying and be anything but sort of exceptionally bullish about what it means long term. It's been a huge success.
Wow. That's amazing. And I'm sure you guys are still in the process of, going and meeting people nationwide and pitching them and so forth.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We have a 20 plus person sales team that does 20,000 meetings a month, I mean, a year, and they're doing those right now. Our research team is on the road. I think two of us are on the road. I've been on the road. I've like a few days off at home, but absolutely, there's huge demand to understand these, huge demand to evaluate them, and people are working through that due diligence process and adding them to portfolios. Just today, this morning, I saw a sales win, a major RIA in the Texas region who's going to be allocating to Bitcoin across all of his many accounts. And we see those sorts of wins every day at Bitwise, and it leaves me very very optimistic.
I would love to be a fly in the wall to listen to your folks pitch this to the RIAs.
It's pretty fun. Maybe we'll see if we can make that happen. But you get great questions. I will say that. Often meetings are scheduled for an hour and run for two.
Mm.
People are very engaged and they want to know because their clients want to know, right? These are financial advisors managing money for Americans. 52 million Americans own crypto. They want to have good professional answers to challenging questions. We try to provide that. And so far, that's working out.
That's awesome, Matt. And congrats on all the success and fingers crossed tomorrow we get some level of approval.
It's been an amazing week. We might as well keep it going.
For sure. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thanks for having me.